Thank you so much, Chairman Schatz. And on behalf of the National Congress of American Indians, thank you for holding this hearing today to address tribal priorities for the 118th Congress. Good afternoon. My name is Shannon Holsey. I serve as the treasurer for the National Congress of American Indians, as well as the president of my tribal nation, the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians. It's truly an honor to be here today. NCAI has submitted written comments for the record that detail a number of legislative priorities. Several of those priorities, for example, the need to address housing in Indian country, the need to address crumbling education infrastructure on many of our reservations, and the need to reauthorize and expand the Farm Bill to allow for more self-governance and co-management opportunities, are all topics that our partner organizations at this hearing are likely to cover. Given that, I'm going to talk to you about three areas that are no less important, but that may not be discussed as much elsewhere today: health, public safety, and climate change. I want to begin by talking about healthcare in Indian country. NCAI commends Congress for recently providing advanced appropriations for certain Indian Health Services accounts. This change will help protect Indian healthcare from harmful impacts of government shutdowns, and we thank you and all members and staff of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs for their tireless support of this historic moment, decades in the making. Having said that, until the entirety of this IH budget is provided mandatory direct appropriations, it is critical that Congress not only continues to advance appropriation, but improve them as well. Specifically, the advanced appropriation recently enacted did not fund all IHS accounts and flat funded the IHH accounts as it did include. While historic in its inclusion, a flat funded IHS needs fiscal year 2024 adjustments. At a minimum for fixed cost and staffing for newly completed facilities, and should also include the amounts requested by the IHS National Tribal Budget Formulation Work Group. Next, I want to shift to public safety. Congress has long acknowledged its obligation under the Trust and Treaty Responsibility to address and prevent crime in Indian country. Unfortunately, inadequate funding combined with legal history that has repeatedly created barriers for tribal nations trying to exercise their sovereignty to keep their communities safe has resulted in staggering rates of violent crime and victimization of many Indian reservations. NCAI applauds Congress' enactment of the Violence Against Women's Act, VAWA Reauthorization Act of 2022, which, if properly funded, will help address violent crime in Indian country. But while VAWA 2022 was a huge victory for tribal nations, the Supreme Court's recent decision in Oklahoma versus Castro Huerta was a strike against tribal sovereignty and tribal nations' ability to protect tribal citizens. In response to the Castro Huerta decision, NCAI adopted Resolution SAC 22043, calling on Congress to utilize its power to meaningfully strengthen tribal jurisdiction and improve public safety for all people who live on reservations and tribal lands. Specifically, NCAI urges Congress to relax restrictions regarding tribal authority over non-Indian criminal activity, to remove sentencing limitation, and to amend Public Law 280 and other relevant statutes to ensure that states have no criminal jurisdiction in Indian country unless they have first obtained tribal consent to that state criminal jurisdiction. Finally, I would like to spend my last few minutes speaking about the single greatest challenge facing not just Native people, but all peoples: climate change. Tribal nations are leading the way in climate action, mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency responses for their communities, and are an integral part to the global and national response to the climate change crisis. This crisis will not only be averted if we all work together. NCAI urges Congress to consider legislative climate responses that include full and meaningful consultation with decision makers, requires tribal nations free, prior, and informed consent, and includes enforcement mechanisms. The restoration of tribal land, water, wildlife, fishery resources, including identifying and assessing the full cost of climate impacts on tribal lands. Opportunities for co-management and co-stewardship that support intergovernmental partnerships and integrate tribal traditional knowledge in climate responses. Tribal nations must also be included in climate financing action through increased appropriations, grants, public-private financing opportunities, and removal of barriers to tribal climate responses, including competitive grants and matching fund requirements. And any federal assistance provided to state and local governments should also be provided to tribal governments through tribal-specific funding mechanisms. In conclusion, NCAI appreciates the opportunity to present Indian Country's priorities for the 118th Congress to this committee. We look forward to working with the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs and its members during this Congress to advance the interests of tribal nations in accordance with the federal trust responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lozano, please proceed.